There is a moment, you probably know the one, where you do something wrong, and instead of thinking about what you did, you start thinking about what it means about you. That's the turn. That's the whole thing, right there. Most people call both experiences shame. The word does a lot of work in ordinary life. We use it for embarrassment, for guilt, for the hot flush of being caught doing something we shouldn't. But there's a distinction buried inside that feeling that most of us have never been given words for. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here's one way to notice it. Two people make the same mistake. They both forget an important meeting. One of them thinks, I dropped the ball. I need to apologize and fix this. The other thinks, I am the kind of person who drops the ball. This is who I am. Same external event, completely different interior experience. The first person is dealing with an action. The second is dealing with their entire self. That second experience is shame, and it behaves nothing like guilt. The psychologist Helen Block Lewis spent years studying transcripts of therapy sessions, line by line, the actual texture of what people said when they felt bad about themselves, and she came to a different conclusion. Shame and guilt are not points on a spectrum. They are categorically different experiences that happen to share a neighborhood. Guilt, she argued, is about an act. The focus stays outside the self. I did that, and that was wrong. There's discomfort in guilt, but the self remains mostly intact. You can apologize. You can repair. The damage is localized. Shame attacks the self directly. Not, I did something bad, but I am bad. The whole person becomes the problem. And this is not just a harsher version of the same feeling. It's a different psychological operation entirely. This is worth sitting with for a second, because if guilt says here's something to fix, shame says you are the thing that needs fixing. And you cannot repair yourself the way you can repair a broken plate. Sylvan Tompkins was a psychologist who spent decades trying to map the architecture of human emotion. Not the stories we tell about feelings, but the biological signals underneath them. He called these affects, raw, hardwired responses. And he made a strange observation about shame. Shame, he argued, is not simply a negative emotion. It is something more specific. It interrupts positive affect. It shows up precisely when connection is happening, or trying to happen, and cuts it off. Think about that. The moments when shame tends to arrive are not moments of isolated failure in private. They are moments of exposure, when someone is seen or about to be seen. A child who runs toward a stranger with excitement, then suddenly freezes and buries their face. An adult who says something vulnerable and then watches the room for a reaction. Shame arrives at the moment of reaching toward another person and then something, a gap, a signal that the connection will not happen or should not. Tompkins called it an affect because he thought it was something like a circuit breaker. When positive feeling gets interrupted, when interest or excitement hits a wall, shame is what the system produces. It's not just pain, it's a specific signal. Stop, withdraw. The social bridge has collapsed. This is why shame feels so different from almost every other negative emotion. Most negative emotions push you towards something. Action, resolution, escape. Shame tends to pull you inward, and it tends to do so at exactly the moments when you most need to stay in contact with other people. Donald Nathanson, a psychiatrist who spent his career building on Tompkins, mapped out 4 directions a person can move when shame is activated. He called it the compass of shame. And it's worth knowing, because once you recognize these 4 moves, you will see them everywhere. The first direction is withdrawal, hiding, disappearing from view. Physically, socially, emotionally, just removing yourself from the scene of exposure. This one is easy to recognize. It looks like going quiet at a party after saying something you regret. It looks like not showing up. The second direction is avoidance, not withdrawal exactly, more like distraction. Filling the interior with noise so the feeling never has a chance to land. Busyness, substances. Humor used defensively. The goal is to never be still enough for the shame to catch you. The third direction is attacking yourself, capitulating to the shame rather than running from it. Agreeing preemptively with the worst version of what others might think. This is where you get the excessive apology, the self-deprecation, that has a slightly strange edge to it. the person who beats themselves up so thoroughly that no one else needs to. The fourth direction is attacking others, and this one is the most counterintuitive, so stay with it. When shame is intolerable, when a person cannot face the feeling that they are deficient, exposed, inadequate, they sometimes externalize it. Project it outward, the shame becomes rage. The person who cannot bear to feel small makes someone else smaller. The person caught in wrongdoing responds with contempt for whoever caught them. The defensive aggression of the humiliated. Nathanson's compass isn't a theory about bad people behaving badly. It's a theory about what human beings do when a particular kind of pain becomes unbearable. None of these moves are chosen exactly. They're more like reflexes, the nervous system doing what it knows how to do. Here's something that doesn't get said enough. Shame and narcissism are closer together than almost anyone wants to admit. The surface of narcissism looks like the opposite of shame: grandiosity, entitlement, an inflated sense of importance. But researchers who study both, June Price Tangney was one of the important voices here, found that shame proneness and narcissism are correlated. Not opposites, related. The grandiosity, in many cases, is a structure built over shame, not a replacement for it, a cover. The person who cannot tolerate feeling deficient builds an interior story about being exceptional. Not adequate, exceptional. Because adequate would still leave room for doubt. Only exceptional seals the gap. This is why narcissistic injury, the rage that arrives when someone with narcissistic patterns is challenged, criticized, or simply fails to be admired, has the texture of shame rather than normal frustration. It's not, "I'm annoyed you don't appreciate me." It's, "Your failure to admire me has exposed something I cannot allow to be exposed." The attack that follows is Nathanson's fourth direction, the compass spinning toward the other person. I find this genuinely sad more than anything else. Not as an excuse, just as a fact. The most offended people are often the most ashamed ones. Shame is sometimes called the social emotion, and there's something right about that, but the phrase is misleading if you take it to mean that shame is about being embarrassed in front of others. It's more precise than that. Shame is the signal that we may be losing our place in the group. For most of human history, exclusion from the community was not metaphorically dangerous. It was actually dangerous. No shelter, no food, no protection. The social bond was survival. And a failure of belonging, being seen as defective, as contaminated, as not quite one of us, would have triggered something close to a threat response. Tompkins's instinct was that shame was always fundamentally about interrupted connection, not just social embarrassment, but the deeper thing underneath it. The fear that the person you are reaching toward will not reach back. That exposure will mean rejection. That being known fully will cost you the bond. This is why shame is so often silent. Guilt can be spoken. Guilt says, "I did this, I'm sorry." Shame cannot be spoken as easily, because to speak shame is to expose exactly the deficiency that you are afraid will drive others away. The secret of shame is shame maintaining. Naming it is the very thing it prevents, which might be why, when it does get named, carefully, in the right conditions, something changes. Not instantly, not completely, but something shifts. The wound that stays hidden stays infected. The one that gets air sometimes, slowly, heals. There was a researcher, Brené Brown's work draws from this tradition, though the original empirical work is older, who found that the difference between people who seem to carry shame constantly and people who move through it more lightly was not the absence of shame. The resilient ones got ashamed too. They just had a different relationship to it. The difference was something like this. They could hold shame as information without letting it become identity. The feeling arrived. I am bad, I am defective, I am exposed, and instead of collapsing into it or defending against it, they could, somehow, sit next to it. Notice it without fully becoming it. This is harder than it sounds, because the whole nature of shame is that it colonizes the self. It doesn't just show up as a feeling, it shows up as a fact. This is what I am. Disagreeing with it requires a kind of psychological leverage that is not always available, and sometimes is only available in relationship. in the presence of another person who does not withdraw when you are exposed. Which brings us back to Tompkins. Shame is about interrupted connection. And what seems to move it, not cure it, just move it, is restored connection. The moment someone sees the thing you were certain would make them leave, and stays. That sentence from early on, the social bridge has collapsed. The bridge gets rebuilt the same way it collapsed. In contact. In the presence of another person. Not fixed, not resolved, just not alone in it. Which, for something as isolating as shame, is its own kind of repair.